actually appreciate his honesty. He did say, you have to go home empty-handed. Leah Thomas takes the trophy home. End of story.
I'm just asking, is there a difference between women and men?
What I can say here is that the NCAA has rules in place.
Yeah, I'm going to try again.
The rules were clear.
Do you believe there's a difference between women and men?
I often get the question, what does it look like when a person's being truthful? In a video that went viral, Ted Cruz questions Kelley Robinson, a human rights campaign president, and Riley Gaines about women's sports. In this short video, we learn what being truthful can look like, as well as what being extremely deceptive can look like. So stay tuned, this is gonna be interesting. First, Cruz questions Riley Gaines, a former competitive swimmer.
You had an incredible record as a swimmer at the University of Kentucky, but yet on March 27th, 2022, something changed. What happened on March 17th, 2022?
That's when Thomas and I raced in the 200 freestyle and again resulted in a tie.
We haven't heard enough yet to establish a pattern. However, it's important to note that truthful answers tend to be short, fluent, and to the point, addressing exactly what the question is about. Deceptive language, on the other hand, contains a lot of so-called unnecessary language, such as irrelevant observations to buy time, hitches that express equivocation, and appeals to honesty like honestly and to be honest. In terms of narration, Gaines's answer here is called a prologue. The prologue sets the scene and leads to the critical event, which is the main event of the narrative. The critical event leads to the aftermath. What were the consequences of this critical event? In this particular instance, there's no aftermath, because this hearing is the aftermath. The prologue's expected to be short and to the point, as we see that her prologue is. Deceptive people often give more weight to the prologue and aftermath, because they can't convincingly describe the critical event, either because it didn't happen, or because they know it didn't happen the way they claim it did. Next, we get to the critical event.
And so you tied. What was the consequence of tying?
We went behind the awards podium where typically you're handed your trophy, you're marched out, you're named an All-American. And so we go back there and the official looks at both Thomas and myself and says, great job, but you guys tied. And we only have one trophy, therefore we're giving this trophy to Leah. And I question this and I say, why? And at first I shortened it in my testimony, but really he stumbled on his words. He didn't know how to answer this. And at first he's, well, we're just doing this in chronological order. To which I further pressed and I said, okay, well, what are you being chronological about? Because we tied. And if we're doing this off alphabetical order, G comes before T. So what are you being chronological about? To which this wasn't a script they had prepared for him. And he actually appreciated his honesty. He did say, we have to give the trophy for Leah because Leah has to have it for pictures. They've made that clear. Leah has to have the trophy for pictures. You have to go home empty-handed. Leah Thomas takes the trophy home. End of story.
Gaines's fluency is worth noting here, particularly when giving direct quotes. We can't know for certain that these are direct quotes. However, the thing worth noting is that she doesn't think hard about them and that she doesn't stumble on her words in order to buy time. Linguistically, this strengthens her credibility, as she seems to recall actual events as opposed to making things up. Also, her language is assertive. We don't find any equivocation. Deceptive people often equivocate in order to grant themselves leeway to change their statements later on. As an instance of the adverb actually. Actually is dependent, meaning it's used when the speaker is comparing one thought to another thought, typically the opposite thought. In some cases, this adverb points to deception, like when a criminal says, I actually didn't know her, talking about his victim. In that case, actually shows us that he's comparing not knowing her to in fact knowing her. In this case, however, it doesn't point to deception at all.
I actually appreciate his honesty. He did say.
Here actually indicates surprise, that it's surprising that she has to sit there and praise his honesty, when the fact is that his honesty was discriminating. Next, we should notice how fast Gaines answers Cruz's more than simple question. She's assertive and to the point. This is in direct contrast to Robinson, as we'll see in a moment.
Now, let me ask you, as someone who's competed at the elite level, in your experience, is there a difference between women and men?
Of course. I think we learned this at a very young age, watching even 12 and unders play. Going through puberty causes irreversible advantage, that no matter the training, no matter the diet, no matter any alterable change you can make will overcome that male advantage, especially in sports like swimming where lung capacity matters so much. Even something as silly as throat size, men have on average a 40% larger throat, which sounds like it's nothing, but when you're grasping for air, that 40% larger throat makes a huge difference in athletic success, not to mention height. You guys know the differences.
Gains starts with,
Of course.
and ends with.
You guys know the differences.
However, she's being too nice because next Robinson opposes these obvious statements, or more likely, pretends to oppose them. First, we should note the 3-second pause before Robinson answers, indicating hesitation in order to buy time.
Ms. Robinson, do you agree with Ms. Gaines that there's a difference between women and men?
If the question is about trans women,
I'm just asking, is there a difference between women and men?
Hesitation is context specific. If someone asks a complicated question or a question we don't immediately understand, short pauses before answering are expected. Here, however, the question isn't difficult, but Robinson makes it difficult for self-serving reasons. Self-serving because the admission she would have to make here would devastate her case, which says something about the strength of her case, that such a simple question would be enough to ruin it. Thus, in order to buy time, she casts doubt on the question.
what I can say here is that the NCAA has rules in place. They've had rules in place for the last decade, and when this competition
I'm
happened,
going to try again.
the rules were clear.
One of the more surprising points in statement analysis is that people tell the truth, even or especially when they don't want to. People say what's on their mind. Here, Robinson starts with,
What I can say here is that
and I believe her. She's saying what she can say. She's not saying what she knows she's supposed to say. She's not giving the answer she knows she's supposed to give. She's able to say whatever benefits her case, not what goes against it. With the vowel stress on the noun decade, she makes it sound like these rules are common knowledge, and thus that it's strange Cruz wouldn't know about them or wouldn't consider them when asking. There's only one problem though, but a rather big problem. They weren't talking about the rules. So Robinson's appeal to how long these rules have been in place is irrelevant to the question. Logically, her first evasion attempt fails. But what about the second attempt?
Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? It's a yes/no question. Do you believe there's a difference?
Oh, I think that we're talking about this case with the NCAA.
No, I'm asking.
Here, she evades by trying to make it sound like she's providing a context which Cruz hasn't provided, even though, given Gaines's testimony, the context's more than clear. The hedge, I think, functions as a weak qualifier in this evasion technique, which also tells us something about the lack of strength of her deceptive objection.
No, I'm asking a question. Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? Most people could answer this very simply. I'm curious if you're willing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just putting it into the context of the conversation that we're having.
O is called a realization token, used to indicate surprise.
Oh, absolutely.
As if she just now realized what Cruz is asking about. This is deceptive, considering how simple Cruz's question is, and that Gaines understood it immediately. Absolutely overemphasizes her supposed willingness to cooperate with Cruz, which is deceptive considering that her answers indicate resistance, and unwarranted resistance at that.
I'm just putting
like the adverb actually, the adverb just is dependent, meaning that it's used to compare one thought to the opposite thought, like when someone says we're just friends or we're just going out for a short while. People say that because they compare being friends to not being friends, compare going out for a short while to a long while, etc. This tells us that she's likely comparing putting this into the alleged proper context to not putting this into the proper context, because there is no complicated context for such a simple question. So once again, we see that she hides behind hypercorrectness, which is an evasion technique politicians often use. Lastly, we should note her unnecessary language.
I'm just putting it into the context of the conversation that we're having.
On the one hand, it's obvious that this is a conversation, so there's no reason to say it. On the other hand, it's also obvious that it's a conversation she doesn't want to engage in. So, in that sense, the way she hypercorrectly states the obvious here makes sense.
Context of the conversation that we're having.
Is that a yes? So I'm trying to get a yes or no. I'm not trying to get a speech. Is there a difference between women and men?
With her half apology, she's becoming less and less assertive.
Is there a...
Unintentionally, she herself points to her own awareness of the fact that she has a weak case, that she knows it's a simple question, and that she knows she's being evasive, because she has to be evasive. That's part of the job, apparently.
I think that there are definitions for biological sex.
Okay, so you're
which
not
is
answering
different
that.
than
Let me
gender.
ask you this question then.
Another evasive answer where she creates a distinction in order to get around the direct yes-no question.
Why do women's sports exist? If you can't define a difference between women and men, why not abolish women's sports and just tell little girls to swim with little boys and see who wins?
Oh, I'm simply saying that that sex is
My
different
question,
than gender.
why
and I do
do-
believe
why
that
do
women's
women's
sports have a great
exist?
value. I mean, Senator, I'll tell you right
Ms.
now.
Robinson,
Once again, she uses the realization token,
Oh, I'm simply saying that
as if she now understands what Cruz is saying and seeks to clarify. The adverb simply creeps into her language, as if what she says is simple, which is deceptive, considering that she's done everything in her power to overcomplicate simple questions. Simply is a linguistic element to look for in a context like this, as it often has a self-protective and thus self-serving function. When the speaker is so self-aware of what they're saying, or not saying, more like it, that they feel the need to overcompensate with unnecessary language. She says,
I do believe
why
that
do
women's sports have a great
exist?
value.
needless to say, this has nothing to do with Cruz's question. She ends with,
I'll tell you right
Ms.
now.
Robinson,
which sounds a lot like overcompensation for her reluctance to answer Cruz's question about differences.
please answer the question I'm asking you.
Absolutely.
Why do women's sports exist?
I think that there are so many positive benefits to sports.
But
I mean,
why have a
we've talked
separate
about it here
category for
today.
women?
Absolutely overemphasizes a supposed willingness to cooperate, when the truth is that all of her actions have indicated the exact opposite.
Absolutely.
Why?
With the vowel stress on sports, she tries to make it sound like what she's saying is obvious, and thus she implies that it's strange Cruz would ask such a thing.
I think that there are so many positive benefits to sports.
And what she says is obvious. However, once again, there's one big problem. They aren't discussing the benefits of sports, but why there's a distinction between men's and women's sports. That's different. Robinson knows that, and with her deliberately poor excuse for an answer, she unintentionally reveals that telling the truth is dangerous for her in her position, which tells us everything we need to know about her work and the organization she represents. That a campaign president, fancy title by the way, would rather sound unintelligent than answer one of the easiest questions in the world.
If there's no difference between women and men, why to have women's sports?
I'm saying that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that the NCAA has rules in place, which they have for the last decade.
Mr. Chairman,
which
I
determine
would
that
like to enter into
related
the
to
record an
participation.
article from Duke Law called Comparing Athletic Performances for the Best Elite Women to Boys and Men.
She ends up where she started, because she never started in the first place, with the same vowel stresses to make her intentionally wrong answers sound obvious.
And that the NCAA has rules in place, which they have for the last decade.
Mr. Chairman,
which
I
determine
would
that.
like...
She starts her answer with
I'm saying that there's a difference.
making it sound like clarification. However, since she isn't addressing Cruz's direct question, it's not an actual clarification, but evasion. She reuses Cruz's word difference.
If there's no difference between women and men, why to have women's sports?
I'm saying that there's a difference between sex and gender.
But she places it in another context, a context where she pretends that she doesn't need to answer his question. This is called lexical reuse, or simply repetition. It's designed to make it sound like the speaker is properly responsive to the issues that the other speaker's question raises. Thus, it can be used deceptively to give the impression of that, when the truth is that the speaker is actually being evasive. Cruz then proceeds with backing for the implicit claims in his questions, that men and women shouldn't compete against each other. In the argument model, backing takes the form of data and statistics.
For example, in the 100 meter, the top record for women in the world was 10.71 seconds. Now, that record for the number one woman in the world in 2017 was, in the year 2017, broken by 124 boys under 18. In that same year, the record for the number one competing woman in the 100-meter dash in the world was broken by a total of 2,474 men.
What do you think about this hearing? Let us know in the comments. See you next time.